The number one most important thing is a good sanding job. Hi, Dave Friedman, Hardwood Floor Finishing 101. In this video, we salvage an oak floor that was butchered due to poor sanding and improper staining. So stick around and I'll show you how we did it. So we're called to salvage a job here. I guess another company had started it, but what they did was they applied the stain and they didn't remove it. I've talked before about how stain is not paint and why there's such a huge difference between applying stain and applying paint. The purpose of applying stain is that you do apply it similar to the way you would apply paint. You have to remove it after. Now if you don't, this is the end result. So you can see this was supposed to be a mahogany stain. It's a custom gouty mahogany stain. So obviously there's issues here. Now apart from the fact that there's some butchering to the floor in terms of how he sanded it here, you can see the drum marks. And then over here, you can see the stain has not been applied correctly. So it appears as though what he did was he just applied the stain and left it on. And over here you can see all the different shading here, from here. And over here it's a similar type of thing. See the mahogany, but it was just left on, it wasn't removed. So we basically have to sand it all off, restain it, and then apply urethane, which is what we're going to do with this job. We're basically sanding, applying this custom mahogany gouty stain, and then we're going to apply 3 coats of satin urethane. So our plan of attack here is we're going to sand this with a 40 grit. This floor has been sanded multiple times. It's a very thin oak floor right now. This house was built approximately 50 years ago. So it's the old style oak strip floor. So you can see here the thickness of these planks are only 3/8 thick. We only have about 1/8 of an inch from the surface to the tongue of the groove. So what happens is after multiple sandings, you get down to the point where you're at the tongue and the groove point. And at that point, you're actually going to be sanding it so thin, at this point, this would actually just peel away. So there's absolutely a limit to how many times you can sand these floors. Now this being a 50-some-odd-year-old house, back in the day, this is what they used to do. They would install these floors unfinished, sand them, and then apply urethane or stain. Usually back then, it was just like an oil-based urethane they'd put on them. So that's why you get those kind of amber-looking floors. But anyway, we have to be careful sanding these because once you get down to the point where you see nail heads all throughout the center of the floor, you're pretty well at the end of the life for sanding. You might be able to screen sand after that and then apply urethane, but you don't want to be doing full sands like you would normally do on a 3/4 inch thick floor, or even one of these floors that hasn't been sanded too often. So you just got to be careful. We can sand it and we can do it, but as I look around, there aren't a lot of nail heads, so I'm not really concerned. Sometimes I go into these places and just all over the floor you see the nail head, so that means you're right at the tongue of the groove and the floor is done. You can use it as a subfloor. It's so thin you can just put new hardwood over top of it. But so anyway, that's what we have to deal with this job, and we'll check back with you later. is a good example of what I talk about, leaving edger lines and not removing them. So you can see these. This is from the previous individual who did this, and they just left all these edger lines intact, and that looks like about 36 grit. That's why it's integral to go over those edger marks with the palm sander and the hand scraper to remove them before you do any staining or finishing of your floor, if you want it to look professional. If you don't mind the edger lines, then go ahead and leave it in there. But it just looks a lot better when you take it out.
If you enjoy these videos, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and check the bell notification box to be alerted to when my upcoming videos are released.
For this job, we'll be applying Gouty Red Mahogany oil-based stain. The traditional way that I stain is just to use the very thin applicator, this one here, and then remove with the sponge mop after. However, this particular stain, which is the Gouty, this one here, it's very thick, it's viscous. It's a wiping stain, so it gives a great tone. As you can see here, it looks spectacular when applied. And if you recall back to the beginning of the video what it looked like before we sanded it, it was not looking too good. You know, whoever did this previously, basically what they failed to do was remove the stain. So when you apply a stain, this is why stain and paint are not the same. I imagine the guy who did it just put it on and left it on. That's why it looked black. As a matter of fact, when I was looking at it to do the quote, I thought it was an ebony stain. But it's actually a red mahogany. So anyway, you can see how it's looking now, but in terms of time, it just takes a lot longer to apply. When I always talk about the sanding, the number one most important thing is a good sanding job. Now, it depends on what your tolerance level is. It depends on what you consider good. I don't like to see edger lines. I don't like to see stop marks from a drum sander. And these are things that I just don't like to see in the end result. And the stain, especially this particular stain, when you apply a dark stain, those sanding errors are amplified. So they are really pronounced afterwards. So that's why it's critical to go through all the steps, take your time, especially if you're just doing this yourself, if you're renting the machines. Anyone can do this. You know, I've done hundreds and hundreds of these floors, so I have more experience, but
you know, if you are considering doing this for the first time, you're going to go rent the sanders and you're going to attempt it yourself, just realize that the sanding is the most important aspect of the entire job. So do a good job sanding, take your time, you know, and go through all the steps and processes that we do, and you'll have a great looking floor. So, you know, if you fail to do that, then it's not going to look great. Now, you might still be happy with it, and that's fine, that's great. But if you're doing it as a contractor, you have to set a higher standard. And I always consider that if I was doing my house, how would I want it to look? You know, that's always the back of my head is, how good could it be? I always think this could be my last job. This job could be the last floor I do. So you want to do a good job. You want it to look spectacular every single time. So, you know, if you take the time and you consistently sand the floor, and that means the entire floor you're very consistent in your paper grits, how you progress up, covering everything, and making sure, especially when you finally get to the square buff and you're square buffing the floor, that you're very consistent. You're evenly sanding to an equal amount everywhere. So if you're doing 4 to 6 passes with the 60 grit, you know, you make sure that you cover the entire thing, 4 to 6 passes with the 60 grit everywhere, right? So these are things you want to consider. And then you vacuum, you go up to your next grit, you go to your 80 grit on the square buff, and you 4 to 6 passes, and it all comes out in the end result. So, you know, these are things you consider when you're sanding a floor. So, you know, then you end up with a beautiful job like this. You know, so this is why practicing, doing, you know, hundreds of floors, you know, hundreds of thousands of square feet, that you just, you know, you end up getting a nice job. So these are all things we want to consider when you're redoing a floor. So I'm going to continue staining the rest of this, and I'll give you an overall look of this room when I'm done the job. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel.